Good afternoon, Bermuda, and to all of the press that are here today. Just a few comments about the march that we had this afternoon on the House of Parliament concerning the bus service and ferry services becoming an essential service. One of the things that we have been looking at as a government is a more responsible way of dealing with the differences that we might have. We believe that by making the buses and the ferries an essential service, what it allows us to be able to do is to approach our differences in a very responsible way, meaning that 21 days notice would have to be given if we are to don our tools. Now, the situation is this. We do not want any of our people at this time in our history to be disadvantaged because there may be differences between the government and the collective bargain agreement with the B.I.U. or any other union. So we're simply seeking out what we believe to be a responsible way forward. How can we negotiate through our differences, but at the same time ensure that services are continued to be supplied to the people of Bermuda? We believe by giving a 21-day notice, no one's rights are being infringed upon. They can still strike if they so wish, but this allows us to be able to let our senior citizens who are catching the bus to be able to get to the pharmacy and to the grocery store. This allows for our young kids who are catching the bus to be able to go to and from school in a responsible and a secure way. For those who have to catch the bus to make it to work because they can't afford to have a car or a bike, we want to ensure that they have enough time to make alternative measures and put things in place. This is not about, as we heard earlier today, going back to the 70s and the 80s when we had strikes. This is not about going back to slavery, as we heard chanted earlier today on the House of Assembly. This is simply about how do we move forward. And I'd like to leave you with this analogy. If we continue to look in the rearview mirror as we drive this vehicle, the budget, and how we move this country forward, we will only see what's behind us and not the potential that lies in front of us. The rearview mirror is very small, but the windshield that we should be looking through going forward is very big. This is about taking the country to a better place. This is about doing it in a more responsible way. This is about ensuring that all stakeholders are informed and they know the way forward. And so with that in mind, I'd like to turn now over to the Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Mike Fahy, so that he can give his statement concerning the issue of essential service concerning the bus and the ferry service. Minister Fahy.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you're already aware, the government has tabled a bill entitled Labor Relations Amendment Act 2014. The purpose of this bill is to designate by inclusion into the first schedule of the Labor Relations Act 1975 public transportation as an essential service. For the sake of clarity, I want to take just a moment to reiterate a few of those services that are already considered essential. Electricity, services provided for the protection of the public health and the prevention of disease, including the collection, transportation, processing and disposal of trade and domestic refuse and sewage. Hospital and nursing, domestic and industrial gas, port and dock services including pilotage, tug and line boat operation not connected with cruise ships, fire, lighthouses, air and marine traffic control, the refueling and maintenance of aircraft to the extent that it is necessary to maintain the essential services, the loading and unloading of mail, medical supplies, foodstuffs, cattle and chicken feed, and all supplies needed to maintain any essential service specified therein, and the transport of such goods to their proper destination. Transport necessary for the maintenance of any essential service specified therein, and the maintenance of that transport. Telephone and overseas telecommunication, meteorological services, airport security services, ground electronic maintenance services connected with the safety of Bermuda Airport and aircraft, and airport infrastructure support services, crash, fire, and rescue services, and air navigation services related to the Bermuda Airport. The latter four of those were added to the schedule in 1995. Much has been said in certain sectors of our community about the fact that public transportation is not an area that the International Labour Organization lists as an essential service. let me take this opportunity to make some things very clear. Over time, the supervisory bodies of the ILO have brought greater precision to the concept of essential services in the strict sense of the term for which strike action may be prohibited. In 1983, the Committee of Experts defined such services as those that the interruption of which would endanger the life, personal safety, or health of the whole or part of the population. The definition was adopted by the Committee of the Freedom of Association shortly thereafter. Clearly, what is meant by essential services in the strict term of the words depends to a large extent on the particular circumstances prevailing in a country. Likewise, there can be no doubt that a non-essential service may become essential if a strike lasts beyond a certain time or extends beyond a certain scope, thus endangering the life, personal safety, or health of the whole or part of the population. Thus, the Committee has considered it to be essential service in the strict sense where the right to strike may be subject to major restrictions or even prohibitions. In short, the ILO says essential services are those services where strikes are prohibited or severely restricted. The only service in Bermuda like that is the police service, which is prohibited from striking. The Bermuda model of essential services is a hybrid, since Bermuda essential services can still strike, but with a 21-day strike notice. As I have said before, the disruption of the public transportation services, and the Premier has said this as well, negatively impacts the island, as most commuters find themselves at the last minute having to make alternative travel arrangements, whether to work, home, or school, as is in the case with our children, until the industrial action is resolved. Not only does it cause great inconvenience, but it has an adverse effect on Bermuda's economic health, as well as our reputation as a premier tourist destination. The consequences of these actions are costly to Bermuda, with the knock-on effect being the loss of fare revenue, as well as the opportunity costs, that is, the loss of future visitation, given the word-of-mouth factor, owing to Bermuda becoming more known for its unreliable public transportation services. The lucrative cruise segment, which we are making every effort to sustain and expand, relies heavily on the public transportation services to facilitate passenger movement around the island. It is for this very same reason that during the past year of meetings held with the cruise ship executives and other entities wishing to establish business in Bermuda, one of the key concerns that continues to arise is the uncertainty of our labor industry, especially relating to public transportation services. Irregular industrial action in this area does in fact represent a serious challenge to the economic well-being of Bermuda. This was in fact recognized by the previous government, who purportedly agreed with the B.I.U. a cooling off period of 72 hours for all B.I.U. workers prior to taking industrial action. The government is anxious to see development and certainty for investors. It will ensure our economic survival. We would like this concern to be a thing of the past by providing assurances that the government is doing its part to address the same. Ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that the public has the benefit of the full facts, during recent consultation with the Labor Advisory Council and the B.I.U., one of the concerns raised by the latter was that the ministry was not making public transportation an essential industry as opposed to an essential service. I must re-emphasize, and for clarity, that an essential industry, as prescribed in the 4th Schedule of the Labor Relations Act 1975, lists the business of a hotel as an essential industry only. Public transportation is a service that the government of Bermuda provides, which our residents, including our school children and visitors alike, come to depend upon as one of the most efficient public transportation services in the world. So as I have already said, when irregular industrial action occurs, this causes a major disruption to service, which negatively impacts on the efforts the government is trying to make with respect to growing the economy, which we are now starting to see. It is important to note that essential industry disputes do not provide for strike notice to be given. Based on our consultation with the union, and I reiterate, there was consultation despite what has been said in the press, it would appear they may be concerned about the implications of passing this legislation that they say could potentially undermine their bargaining power or their right to strike. The Premier has made it clear, and I will make it abundantly clear again, that the government is not trying to remove the union's ability to strike should they not be satisfied with any progress relating to industrial disputes. On the contrary, the government is simply looking to require a 21-day notice period prior to withdrawal of labor. And this 21-day period represents a cooling-off period, which provides management and the union an opportunity to resolve their grievances prior to escalating the matter. The government believes in the rights of workers. That is a fundamental principle of labor. We also support the ILO Committee on Freedom of Association's view that strike action is a right. However, the ILO has made it clear as well that attached to that right are the following prerequisites. 1, the obligation to give prior notice. 2, the obligation to have recourse to conciliation, mediation, and voluntary arbitration procedures in industrial disputes as a prior condition to declaring a strike, provided that the proceedings are adequate, impartial, and speedy, and that the parties concerned can take part at every stage. We have that now. The obligation to observe a certain quorum and to obtain the agreement of a specified majority. The obligation to take strike decisions by secret ballot. The adoption of measures to comply with safety requirements and for the prevention of accidents. The establishment of a minimum service in particular cases. And the guarantee of the freedom to work for non-strikers. There are some who want to characterize what we're doing that this legislation is union busting. Nothing could be further from the truth. We wholeheartedly believe in protecting the rights of workers, employers, and our residents in introducing this bill. We must see the end of our school children being stranded by the roadside. We must see the end of employees missing out on badly needed paychecks because they can't get to work. We must see the end of tourists trying to thumb rides to town to spend money in our shops. And we must see the end of waiting of our seniors for a bus that never comes. In short, adequate notice is not unreasonable to have. It is logical and it is sensible. We are continuing the process of updating the Bermuda legislation to more adequately reflect best practices in other jurisdictions. I give homage to those unionists who worked and continue to work for workers' rights. With that said, I must reiterate that there are collective bargaining agreements in place now between unions, employers, and government. There's a statutory framework that is too often ignored. The ILO makes it clear that when these frameworks are in place, they are there for a reason. As the minister responsible for labor, it is my duty to ensure that those frameworks are followed. This bill will add to the statutory framework and give economic certainty for all concerned. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue to collaborate and develop a relationship. Governments and unions need not be at odds. It is my hope that we can see our way through this impasse and get to a place of reconciliation. The government is working to make Bermuda work for everyone, to make sure that recovery takes off to grow jobs and incomes Bermudians sorely need, to put the years of unemployment and decline behind us. We're happy to take some questions. Thank you.
We're just going to start on this end. Jonathan, did you wish to kick off the Q&A? Yeah.
Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Verba yesterday at his press conference was saying that the first he had heard of the switch to essential services was, he thought, either Wednesday or Thursday when the PS emailed him. Was there any further consultation beyond that with B.I.U. on that decision?
I had raised the issue of making public transport and services related to cruise ships an essential service middle of last year in monthly meetings. I'd raised it on a number of occasions. I can say that the union was not in favor of it, but it was raised again with the Labor Advisory Council, and discussions were held at that forum in a consultative way. Again, the union said that they would prefer not to do it by way of essential service, but would be prepared to discuss an essential industry. That is not what the government is looking to do. So to say that the first it was heard of, if those were in fact the words, would be a wrong characterization entirely. It has been raised on a number of occasions, and that's very clear to me.
One other question, just in terms of the difference between an essential service and an essential industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are getting a bit confused. And it's essential industry, you don't have the 21-day rule, but otherwise, what distinguishes an essential industry?
It's an odd bunch of legislation that's been cobbled together over a period of time. Essential industry, the only one, as I said, is hotels. That has a very specific policy and procedure to follow by way of an essential industries dispute tribunal that I appoint in consultation with the parties in advance. And then members are selected from that panel to address the dispute. Most recently, that panel was instituted with the dispute with the Fairmont. You will see why there is so much confusion. At one point, we had a an industrial service tribunal impaneled. We had a panel that was put underneath the Labor Relations Act for regular services provided by Marine and Ports, and we also had a panel that was impaneled for the essential services of the most recent strike relating to port workers. So what we have in place is very confusing, but it doesn't prevent the parties from following the statutory framework. And that's what we're trying to make sure, that there is notice going forward for those services that we believe are of economic benefit to the country.
Mark, did you have any queries for the minister related to today's topic?
Not specifically, but let me just shoot anyways. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
As stated by B.I.U. leader, Mr. Ferbert, I guess the relations between the B.I.U. and the government are very poor, and he said there would be no more meetings. What steps will be taken to rectify this, and do you think that this will in fact smooth things over or just make it worse for the relations with the union specifically?
Yeah, I don't think that I didn't see them pour up until this point. I think Mr. Ferbert had also said that there were things being done to build the relationship between government, and it's disappointing if Mr. Ferbert doesn't wish to attend the monthly meetings going forward. But I do know that he's continuing to actively engage in the committee that has been struck to reform labor law, and I'm expecting and hoping to see Mr. Ferbert at the next tripartite committee, which I believe is on Friday, when we're hearing from Belco. So I think that we can all be very sensible and say, just because you have a disagreement in one area doesn't mean that's going to cause disagreement for everything else that the government is trying to achieve with the unions. I'm optimistic in these things, that parties can actually come together and reconcile their differences. The union may disagree with this, but there's other things that we can agree on.
Charles, did you have any queries for the minister?
I don't want to belabor the point, but just for some
No
clarity.
pun intended.
Fine.
I got you.
Just for some clarity, the president of the B.I.U.'s dander seemed to have been up when he stated that you and he were having these meetings, and you never once shared this information with him. Was he actually a party to the discussion about making this essential services?
I can again tell you that I had numerous discussions with Mr. Ferbert and others from the B.I.U. in monthly meetings, on at least 2 occasions where I raised this issue as something that the government was looking at. It was raised again in a much wider forum at the Labor Advisory Council, which includes members of the B.I.U., including Mr. Ferbert, including other labor representatives and business. And I can tell you, and I've said it repeatedly, it wasn't agreed to, but it's a consultative body. And the Cabinet and the government has made a decision to proceed on this basis. The Premier has made that clear as well.